Hi, this is Michael William Denny of ThunderShamanism.com, ThunderWizard.com, and AskTheShaman.com. And today we're going to be talking about Chapter 11 in the book, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, the Monotheist Subversion of Traditional Religious Thought. If you're unfamiliar with this book, go ahead and listen to the other videos in this series. And if you're unfamiliar with my work, you can click on the links below, ThunderShamanism.com, ThunderWizard.com. You can see all the books and DVDs that I have and all the other things that I do. And you can go and click on AskTheShaman.com if you want to talk to me directly, if you want personal counseling, if you want a rune reading, or if you want personal instruction. So Chapter 11. Chapter 11 is a very interesting chapter because it goes into looking at the origins of monotheism. Now, let me dispel a myth that probably, I don't know how many people believe this, but monotheism as we know it did not exist before 597 BC. Human beings, according to scientists, have been on the planet for 100,000 years. In this, Homo sapiens sapiens have been on the planet for 100,000 years. In those 100,000 years, human beings have been shamans, polytheists, nature worshippers, animists, but they have not been monotheists until 2,600 years ago, 597 BC. That is when monotheism as we know it was introduced into the world, completely changed everything. It took a little while to catch on, but once it did, completely changed the whole world. Everything in the world was completely changed with this new idea. And why that's important, I mean, I still hear people, run around, you hear Christians, whatever. And I heard a guy say, he was talking to somebody else, thankfully, but he said something about, I worship the original God. I worship Jesus. And it took everything in me not to walk up to the guy and say, listen, your monotheist God didn't exist until 597 BC. I'm sorry. But of course, nobody wants to hear that. If that's their deal and you want to worship Jehovah, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you. But for those who want to know, monotheism didn't exist before that time. And we know this because, first off, both Jews and Christians will tell you that the Bible was not written down until the Babylonian exile, which happened in 597. So here's the background of that. You have, at this point in history, the nation of Israel had now split into two smaller nations of Judea and Israel. And the context behind this is that the Israelites had been vassals to everybody, whether it's the, who knows, the Babylonians or the Egyptians, or they've been battling for their own national identity for hundreds of years. They're in this breadbasket, and there's all these other empires that are fighting, and they at this point are now vassals to the Babylonian Empire. And so they have to give tribute, they have to pay taxes to the Babylonians. And the Judeans, had separated from the other, Hebrew tribes, and now the Jews were their own nation, and they became very nationalistic, and understandably so. They've been fighting for their own national identity for hundreds of years. And so along comes Babylon, is taking taxes from them. And here's what was happening with them. In Jerusalem at that time, they had the government deity. The government-sponsored deity was Jehovah. And Jehovah had his own temple in Jerusalem, and he had a sacrificial flame. And as long as the priests, who were also part of the elite, and the elite ruling class, as long as they worshiped Jehovah and sacrificed to him and kept his flame lit, they believed that Jehovah would protect them from outside invasion. Now, they started getting, again, they started wanting more and more independence, so they decided they weren't going to pay taxes anymore to the Babylonians. So the Babylonians did not like that, and they came down there with their armies, and they did something very symbolic. They trashed the temple, and they put out the sacrificial flame. Then they took the elite class and the priestly class in captivity and hauled them off to Babylon. And of course, then the rest of the Jews paid their taxes, and this went on for 70 years, something like that. And then the Babylonian Empire fell, and then those Jews were free to go wherever they wanted, and a lot of them made their way back to Judea. And it's at this time they come back with this new scripture which we now know as the Old Testament. That's where they wrote it down. Before that time, there wasn't the Old Testament as we know it. And archaeological evidence is absolutely irrefutable. Right before 597 BC, you have archaeological evidence that everybody had altars in their home to multiple gods and goddesses, the same gods and goddesses that everybody was worshiping. There was a sky father, there was an earth mother, there was a fertility goddess, there was all of these things, and you could see they were doing everything everybody else was doing. They were giving offerings and lighting lamps and candles and praying to them, whereas the political elite in Jerusalem were worshiping Jehovah. So they come back with this new religion. And here's what's interesting about this religion. This religion is now monotheist, it's literal, and it becomes mandatory. And they start instituting laws against polytheism. And it starts off with supposedly Moses, who, by the way, also never existed. The whole history of the Jews being taken captive in Egypt and spending 40 years wandering the desert, there is zero evidence of that ever happening. And scholars will tell you, listen, and according to the Bible, there was millions of these Jews wandering the desert for 40 years. A tiny desert, it wasn't even that big. And if you have that many people in that small of an area, in a desert no less, wandering around for 40 years, there is going to be massive amounts of evidence. Nothing. There's no evidence that ever happened. There's no evidence in the writings of the Egyptians. And here's something else that even makes it even more interesting. In the Old Testament, the story goes like this. Moses and Joshua and the freed Israelites coming out of Egypt are making their way back to the land of Canaan. And in that book, they militarily conquer the land of Canaan. They wipe out the Canaanites. The Canaanites are seen as these polytheist, child-killing, pagan-believing people, and that Jehovah has told them to go in and take the land. And in many cases, wiping out entire civilizations, men, women, children, and animals. This never happened. And the reason we know that never happened is because the Jews, the Israelites, were direct descendants of the Canaanites. And in fact, the Canaanite written language is nothing other than Proto-Hebrew. So now we get a bigger picture here. We've got these Canaanites who create a kingdom at one point, and there's a Canaanite kingdom, but then they're conquered by the Phoenicians and the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the whomever else. And so for hundreds of years, these Canaanites, who later started calling themselves the children of Israel, are constantly fighting battles with people who are taking this land away from them. So by the time that they have adopted this idea of being, Jews and Israelites, they create a new mythology for themselves, a new history. And in this history, the children of Israel go in and wipe out the Canaanites and the Canaanite religion. That Jehovah has told them to do this. Now, why would they do this? Well, we've talked a little bit about it, but there's one other thing. And here's how I think it happened. Here you've got these, before the Babylonian exile, you have these Jewish elite politicians and priestly class people who are fighting for, understandably, fighting for their own identity in this very diverse, hostile place where there's constant warfare going on. And they are worshiping this God, Jehovah, who is the protector God of the Israeli people. And he doesn't protect them. The Babylonians come in, sack the temple, put out the flame, take them all into captivity. So now fast forward, imagine them in chains in Babylon, and the priests and the political class are going, what's going on here? The elite are going to the priests and saying, you told us that if we sacrificed to Jehovah, he'd protect us. What happened? And they're sitting there thinking about it. What happened? We did everything Jehovah wanted us to do. Why did he abandon us? He must be a jealous God. That's what it was. We're worshiping all these other gods, and all these other foreign gods are coming in, and he's upset about that. He's the God of Israel. He's the God of our nation. And we're worshiping these other gods. We got to get rid of all the other gods. We got to get rid of them. So they write this scripture, and in it is the Ten Commandments. And here's something interesting about the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are focused on what? The worship of Jehovah alone. Now, all you need is one commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Boom, that's it. It's the first one. But they have more than one. They have 3 commandments that talk about idolatry and not worshiping idols and not worshiping any other gods. And any other god besides Jehovah is not only not okay, but you must be put to death. You have to be stoned to death if you worship other gods. These people come back with this, and what do? Just like the Romans learned from them later on, you use that idea of monotheism to control people politically, economically, and in every other way you can think of. So that's the purpose of monotheism. Now, in the Jews' case, it was very specific. It was for their specific culture. The Romans took it and applied it to the whole world, and now we've got this Christian religion running around telling people, if you don't believe in Jesus, he's the only way, you're going to burn in hell forever. So this is the legacy of that. Anyway, it's a very deep subject. We could go on, but I won't. You can click on the links below. You can buy the book, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, the monotheist subversion of traditional religious thought. You can click on the other websites, thundershamanism.com, thunderwizard.com. And if you want to talk to me directly, you want a rune reading, you can click on asktheshaman.com.